He didn't just tweak the numbers. He fundamentally changed how governments feel about fear, power, and money. John Maynard Keynes wasn't your typical politician, and he certainly wasn't a revolutionary in the violent sense. He was something much rarer, a guy who taught entire nations that the way out of despair was to open their wallets. For centuries, we looked at debt like a sin. Running a deficit was a moral failure. A balanced budget was the ultimate sign of being a good government, like fiscal chastity. But Keynes flipped that script completely. He told world leaders that spending money when times were tough wasn't reckless. It was actually the responsible thing to do. He made debt feel like a duty and saving look selfish. And in doing so, he rewired the very logic of capitalism, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever quite as simple as it seems. Let's set the scene in the ashes of the Great Depression. Imagine the world in 1930. Banks are crumbling, factories have gone quiet, and millions are out of work. The old economic playbook, the one built on Adam Smith and the invisible hand, said the market would fix itself. The theory was that supply and demand would eventually balance out. Prices would drop until people could afford to buy again. Recovery was supposed to be automatic. But theory doesn't put food on the table for a starving family. In the real world, demand didn't come back. Factories stayed shut. And people, terrified of losing the little they had left, stopped spending entirely. The economy wasn't correcting itself, it was freezing to death. This was the world Keynes looked at, and he realized something radical. Markets aren't perfect machines. They don't always heal themselves. Sometimes they get stuck in a feedback loop of pure fear. Here's how he saw it. When people stop spending, businesses stop hiring. When businesses stop hiring, incomes drop. And when incomes drop, spending collapses even further. It's a spiral, an economic black hole. Keynes saw that the economy didn't lack discipline. It lacked demand. It needed money flowing through the veins of the system. In simple terms, recessions happen when everyone tries to save at the exact same time. And paradoxically, that collective caution makes everyone poorer. He called it the paradox of thrift. Think about it. What's smart for you individually? Cutting costs, hoarding cash, becomes a disaster when everyone does it at once, because my spending is your income. If I stop buying, you stop earning. When spending dies, the economy's heartbeat stops. So, Keynes proposed something that sounded absolute crazy at the time. If private demand collapses, the government has to step in and replace it. The state needs to borrow money, hire workers, build things, and get cash moving again. That money creates jobs. Jobs create income. Income creates spending. And that spending restarts the engine. To the old-school economists, this was heresy. Governments weren't supposed to meddle. Deficits were dangerous. But Keynes wasn't saying debt was good, he was saying that timing is everything. He believed governments should act against the current, spend big during the busts, and save money during the booms. Stimulus and restraint. You need both, just at different times. He used a great metaphor for this. He said the economy is like a car. Usually, the private sector is in the driver's seat. But when the car stalls, the government has to turn the key, pump fuel into the engine until it catches. Once it's purring again, the government steps back. That's how you keep the motion alive. In his famous 1936 book, The General Theory, he turned this logic into a full framework. He introduced aggregate demand, the total spending from everyone in the economy. When that drops, people lose jobs. The only fix is to boost spending until confidence returns. And that's the key word, confidence. Keynes viewed economics as psychology, not just math. He said markets are driven by animal spirits, our gut instincts, hopes, and fears. You can't fix fear with an equation. You fix it with action. Bold, visible action. When the government spends, it's sending a signal, we believe in the recovery. That belief itself becomes fuel. Keynes understood that confidence, not austerity, is what ends a recession. Of course, people didn't listen immediately. In the early 30s, leaders clung to the old religion of penny pinching. Britain strangled its exports. Germany slashed spending to prove they were disciplined and ended up paving the way for extremism. In the U.S., Herbert Hoover waited for the market to fix itself. It didn't. By 1933, a quarter of Americans were jobless and the free market was silent. Enter Franklin D. Roosevelt. He wasn't an economist, but his gut instincts matched Keynes's brain. He realized that when fear stops people from spending, the government has to spend for them. The New Deal wasn't just a program, it was a philosophy. They built dams, hired artists, paved roads. The government became the nation's biggest customer, pumping wages directly into the economy's bloodstream. And slowly, it worked. But it took something far bigger and darker to prove Keynes undeniably right. World War II. When the war started, governments finally did exactly what Keynes had been begging them to do. They spent without worrying about the price tag. Factories roared back to life, not for cars, but for tanks and planes. Unemployment vanished overnight. The brutal irony is that total war became the ultimate experiment in Keynesian economics. And it worked. It proved that massive government spending could snap a depression in half. When the war ended, Keynes's theories became the new gospel. His fingerprints were everywhere: the post-war reconstruction, the welfare state, the golden age of growth. Keynes gave capitalism a second lease on life, one managed by policy, not just left to chance. But like every great idea, it came with a hidden cost. Once a system learns that spending can fix a crisis, it also learns that you can put off the hard work of saving forever. After the war, Keynes was practically a prophet. Governments rebuilt Europe using his blueprint. The Marshall Plan, the social safety nets. They were all built on the idea that demand must never be allowed to die. Through the 50s and 60s, Keynesianism was the operating system of the free world. Recessions got shorter, recoveries got faster. We thought we had tamed the business cycle. For the first time, capitalism was on a leash, and Keynes had handed that leash to the government. But here's the side effect: dependency. Politicians realized voters loved the spending part of Keynes's theory, but hated the saving part. The idea of running a surplus in good times, Keynes's golden rule, was conveniently forgotten. By the late 60s, the machine started overheating. Inflation rose. Then, the 70s oil shocks hit, and the world found the limits of the theory. We got stagflation, high inflation and high unemployment at the same time. That wasn't supposed to happen. The engine was broken. Governments tried to spend their way out, but it just made inflation worse. Faith in Keynes faded. A new school took over, led by Milton Friedman, who argued that the government was the problem, not the solution. For a while, it looked like Keynes was history. But economic ideas don't die, they just hibernate. Fast forward to 2008. The global markets crashed, and suddenly the old reflex kicked in. The same governments that preached saving money for decades suddenly rediscovered the checkbook. Bailouts, stimulus, quantitative easing. It was Keynes's playbook, but on steroids. Central banks didn't just guide the economy, they became the economy. It worked. Sort of. The system didn't collapse, but it created a new problem Keynes hadn't planned for. In the modern world, that flood of money didn't go to workers. It went to financial markets. It inflated stocks and housing, not wages. We restarted the engine, but we turbocharged inequality. Then came the pandemic, and Keynes was resurrected again in his purest form yet. Governments printed trillions overnight. Checks went straight to people. It was a global experiment in fiscal adrenaline. For a moment, it felt like magic. The economy stayed alive while the world shut down. But then the bill arrived. Inflation roared back. And we faced the same old dilemma. The medicine that saved the patient was making them sick. Keynes designed a tool to stabilize capitalism. But what happens when the tool becomes the whole system? Today, nearly a century later, Keynes's logic is everywhere. And that's the problem. Every time there's a bump in the road, governments pull the same lever. Borrow, spend, inflate. Each rescue leaves the economy a little more dependent, a little more fragile. The balance Keynes imagined, discipline in good times, help in bad times, has been replaced by permanent stimulus. And yet, you have to respect the man's brilliance. Keynes didn't just give us math, he gave us a mirror. He showed us that economics is about belief. When people lose trust in the future, the economy dies. He gave us a way to keep that belief alive. But here is the haunting truth we're living with. The modern world runs on belief without boundaries. The system Keynes saved is now addicted to his medicine. Every time we spend, our tolerance for pain gets lower. Today's markets don't fear a recession. They fear the withdrawal of government money. Keynes once famously said, "In the long run, we are all dead." He meant it as a challenge, that we shouldn't wait for the long run to fix people suffering today. But over time, that quote became an excuse to borrow endlessly and push the consequences to the future. That is the irony of John Maynard Keynes. He didn't destroy capitalism, he saved it, again and again. But in saving it, he made it mortal, dependent, fragile. The man who taught governments how to spend also taught them how to forget when to stop. If this gave you a new perspective, hit subscribe. History has the answers. I'm just here to show you where to look.